the only glimpse that I've got of how a new revelation, a new experience of the divine could look is through psychedelics.
Thank you for saying that. This has been my thing. I do think that we've so demonized this thing, and they're for good reason. They're very dangerous. People shouldn't just go taking them for in the backyard of their house. But people have reported, including myself, I've talked about this on my channel, spiritual awakenings through taking psychedelics. The founder of AA, Bill W., his name was one of these people who was going out and doing LSD, and he had a spiritual.
Wow.
Yes, this is
no
written in the biography of Bill W. The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous had a spiritual awakening through LSD that got him sober, and he wrote this down. And he even included the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know this for a good reason. I've been through these steps. The 12th step is to go out and have a spiritual awakening.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do psychedelics. But they really promote like joining a religion, joining Christianity, join that, find a God, find a God of your understanding. But I don't think that was what Bill intended. I think Bill was really serious when he said some people might have to try there might be some sort of closed way or safe way, medically induced or whatever, for people to experience something that they've never experienced before that can give them a different a viewpoint. Different standpoint of where they are.
And for most people who think psychedelics is just another drug, the person who was like the founder of a detox movement being inspired by drugs is a contradiction in terms. But obviously, once you experience both of these substances, you understand how different they are.
Yeah, and okay, so in the modern world, people have reported, including myself, having experiences that changed their lives on psychedelics. And I'm not forgetting that other people have had really rough experiences that might have ruined their lives. I'm sure we need to bring both to the table. But then we look at ancient religions, as we've been talking about in this discussion, and you can see a lot of these ancient traditions had some form of a psychedelic. In Eleusis, they drank the kykeon. In the Persian tradition of the Magi, they drank the haoma drink. There's even evidence that the Temple of Yahweh in Elephantine also drank the haoma. And you go to India, they drank the Soma. There's another drink called kumba, I think kuba, that the Scythians would drink. It's like fermented milk. By the way, all of these are not the same. They're not prepared the same way. Kykeon is not the same as haoma. Haoma is not the same as Soma. Soma is not the same as kuba. They're all different. The Celts drank a form of mead that was magical, that they used like honey or something to make it. And like they put them in altered states of consciousness. The priest would take them and they would, whatever. But the point is, I'm noticing they're all united, even though they're different recipes, but they're united in the sense that they all were using some sort of sacred beverage to get to this. And in Peru, you have ayahuasca. Even to this day, they're still doing that.
Yeah, and you mentioned Soma, and when I first heard that in the Vedas you have mention of the Soma, immediately I thought it's probably mentioned in one verse and some hippie.
All over the Vedas.
It's all over the place.
Anyone who's read the Vedas will tell you every page it's mentioned 20 times.
It's mentioned 20 times. And they even make a distinction between the special ones who are the pressers of the Soma and the common. It's like what separates the common people from the knowers is that knowledge of the Soma. It's everywhere. I was very surprised to read it.
Those drinks that I mentioned, kykeon, Soma, haoma, and kuba, are all cognates. So they have the same name for different ways of making a beverage. So it's not the name of the beverage that they're calling it. They're basically calling it divine drink.
Divine
different
drink.
languages. And they make it differently. But if you trace back their Indo-European root of that word, it goes back to the word kehu. I don't know how to pronounce it right, but it's spelled like K-H-E-W and with the little asterisks. You know how Indo-European words are?
Like reconstructed.
And the word is also cognate with the English word God is cognate with this word, which tells us this is going back very far. This is a divine process that these Indo-Europeans were.
Which is interesting because, the word, a lot of people think that the word theos in Greek is almost a cognate to Zeus because it sounds so similar. And it's not.
It's not. And I always thought it was until Luke Ranieri, the Greek expert, was like, nope.
And the word theos is really of strange
Because you
origins.
get Deos, which is from the sky,
Yeah,
and Theos is like some sort of Theos or
yeah,
something
yeah,
different.
yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds
They
very
just
similar,
happen to
and
sound the
yeah,
same.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
No, it's fascinating, and there is this book, The Immortality Key, and I finally got to read it because it
I think it's
was.
pretty good.
I think it's a very good book. I think it's a very good book, but
It's one of those heavily criticized.
but I found it as well somewhat frustrating
I
in its
agree with you,
scope.
but I think he's asking good questions. Maybe not the answers that I agree with. I think the questions he's asking are on point. Of
The
why can't
question,
we have these things in the modern world?
yeah. Well, why can't we have this thing? And just segueing off that, I find that although we have had something that people call the psychedelics renaissance, right? People like Joe Rogan was a big player, people, because, we had the 60s and they used a lot of psychedelics, and then it went underground because it went so, it was a Schedule One drug, which
Yeah.
means it was as illegal as heroin, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously when you push something on the fringes, the people who keep doing it are people on the fringes. They're
Yes.
marginal people.
Yeah.
Little
Outcasts.
outcast.
Yeah.
So these drugs were associated with the outcast, with crazy artists at best, madmen and criminals at worst.
Or mystics.
Or mystics, self-proclaimed mystics. And then you have people, quote unquote, normal people who take these things, that go out, and they're like, look at me, I've got a job, got a great family, got a career, yet I also take psychedelics. And people went, wow, I didn't know that could happen. And we had something called the psychedelic renaissance. And at the same time, I saw moves pushing further into criminalization, like in 2012, right when people were starting to see these substances differently. In the United Kingdom, there was the 2012 Psychedelics Act, as it was called. What I found fascinating about the Psychedelics, and it's the first time I'm mentioning it, what I found fascinating about the Psychedelics Act is if you want to criminalize a substance, you criminalize the substance. You write it on the black book. You say, this molecule here is cocaine, and this is what we're criminalizing for X, Y, Z reasons. But the 2012 Psychedelics Act came right around the time when people were doing all these derivatives from LSD.
LSA,
LSA,
LS1. I remember that.
So somehow they wanted to bundle everything together. So they have a description of essentially
They just tweak it a little bit, and it's not illegal anymore.
Yeah. So what they were trying to do is make all these substances illegal. So what they did was really crazy. They have a description. What they're criminalizing essentially is any substance that can give you a certain description of effects, which we call the psychedelic experience. So essentially, they're criminalizing an experience. They're not criminalizing, which is crazy. It's like criminalizing, I don't know, falling in love. They're criminalizing
the experience.
The experience.
That's interesting.
Rather than a substance, which you wouldn't think they can even do that.
Right.
But it's obviously this experience that they're somehow afraid of all the problems
it's interesting.
that the world has. Is that what they're so it makes you think a little conspiratorially.
Well, I know. I was going to say that people do think there's something.
Yeah.
But then you think, is the negative effects, people having bad trips and waking up in the hospital, does that outweigh the positive of people having spiritual awakenings and changing their lives?
It comes to a country where I've lived in the UK, you go to a hospital on a Friday and you think you're after like a war, you have a line of people that just came from the pub and they're bleeding from all sides of their face because they were in fist fights or they just stripped and
alcohol is completely legal.
And alcohol is completely legal. It's a very
driving around on alcohol, killing people.
Yeah. So you are like a UK lawmaker. You see the effect that alcohol has on your society, and you think that psychedelics are your problem.
Right.
It's weird. It makes you flirt with some conspiracy theories, as if the lawmaker had some relation with, Agent Smith from The Matrix, where, he just doesn't want you to find the secret.
Yeah, I mean, because it makes you think, what would happen if thousands to, hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of people started to have these awakenings and start thinking differently about capitalism and being in a rat race and why do I work 9 to 5 when I can be out here doing that? And then that might be a problem for the system. Well, they need you to work somewhere. You need to be part of you need one of the cogs of this system. Where people might, I forgot his name from the 60s, who said famously, drop out and
Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary. What was he saying? He wanted people to tune in, drop out. And if everyone started doing that, that's not good.
No,
so you can see the angle of the so-called conspiracy.
You can see the angle. I think you put it correctly because you don't have to theorize about some kind of dark cabal that are trying to hide. I think that systems it's like capitalism.
You want a system where people drink caffeine.
They have a sort of intelligence. Systems have a sort of consciousness.
Yeah, you want people to be caffeined up, working 9 hours, and then go home and take a couple drinks and calm down, go to bed, do it again the next day. That's what you want. Those drugs, caffeine and alcohol, work great for our system. But psychedelics, that's going to make people be doing something different. They're not going to want it. So I think that's what answers that question.
And yet, to play devil's advocate, again, there's a book by a psychologist called James Hillman, and it's called something like "We had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world is getting worse," something like that. It's the title that I find fascinating because it's true. It's true. We have had it, and I can say similar things about psychedelics. We had like 50 years of psychedelics and the world is getting worse. In that, despite all these awakenings, sometimes if you follow this psychedelic renaissance, if you just watch too much Joe Rogan or whatever, you think that something's happening, something great.
And sometimes it's dark.
And sometimes it's dark.
And it brings you to places that are not necessarily awakenings, more falling asleep.
Yeah, exactly. You look outside your window, you look at what's happening, and you're like, are people more awake or conscious or unaware of what's happening?
This is kind of what Brian Muraresku was getting at, was if you took this thing and brought it back to the religious aspect rather than the partying aspect, what can that open? That could be the key.
So there's a missing component.
Key.
Exactly.
But when we look at Eleusis is so fascinating to me because even though it was secretive and we don't have a lot of primary sources of what went on in there's only a few texts that actually describe the events. One thing that they always say all across the board, Cicero was one of the people who pointed this out, is that people went to this thing, it transformed their lives, they no longer feared death, and they felt like everything was good. That sounds like something that would be good for society. Something that people can go to that can transform their lives and they no longer fear death and they're saved from it. How do we get that back?
A rational way back to that.
Controlled.
Way back to that. Because I think it's only half of the issue. It's taking that experience and placing it inside of a new theology that can give you, you need the practice, you need the theory. One of the things that I always crave during this experience is to communicate them, because if you are on a trip, as we say, with other people, usually everyone's in their own trip. And it's very hard to communicate. You're seeing something, you're thinking of something, you're experiencing something of great beauty right here, right now. And you want to go, like children do, look at that. And someone's on their own trip, they're crying over something. And so I think part of a psychedelic science would be to navigate these spaces, to be able to find a map of the territory, rather than rehashing of, because I've heard enough of Terence McKenna, I've heard enough of these people, and they're all fascinating and they're all very poetic, but they're all stuck in this kind of loop of, we don't know what it is, it's fascinating, could be aliens, could be beings from another dimension, could be the ancient gods coming back, could be your dead ancestors, could be this, could be that, but it's fascinating.
But it makes you wonder, did the Eleusinian hierophants, or priesthood of Eleusinians, did they have the same question of why is it? I don't think so. They seem to be doing it the right way.
No, because when they went out of it, they felt like they experienced something they've been hearing all their lives.
Something fulfilling about it.
Yeah, and something.
And that's what I'm wondering is where, like you said, Terence McKenna and a lot of people are just so, what is this? Is it working? Is it not?
Yeah.
But like, is there a way out of that? Is there a way to answer that question?
I don't know, but it's worth trying.
Yeah.
It's worth trying. It's worth trying finding our way back to the mysteries of Eleusis.
I think what you're pointing out is, and you went in this direction I wasn't expecting, but I think that it might be something very important for how we do religion going forward. How do we answer the question that, how do we fix Nietzsche's problem of the proclamation of the death of God? How do we bring back God into our society in a rational way, but also life-affirming, also something that people can look forward to? And is it the psychedelics? I don't know. Maybe that's just one aspect. Maybe there's more than that.
I think it's one aspect, but it's very much about reading the times. Like we talked about, if you go back to the early Christians, it's very much, you find there was an existential condition that we call Gnosticism, and Christianity comes out of it with like a new message, there's an existential condition of the early 21st century.
And just to sort of highlight the dark side of that psychedelics and tie it to Gnosticism, there was a report in Hippolytus's Against Heresies of the successor of Valentinus, whose name was Marcus the Magus. And he supposedly, his sect called the Marcosians, they were Valentinians that went into this group. The Valentinians that broke off into another group called the Marcosians, and they settled in France, modern day France, Gaul at the time. This guy got charged with adding a purple drug, purple pharmacon, to the Eucharist and was giving it to women so that they can have an experience and talk to what he mentioned was the graces. It didn't say to talk to Christ. It said to talk to the graces, the charis. I'm thinking, wow. And but like they were talking about it in a negative way. This guy was performing magical tricks. He was putting one cup here. He had another cup behind him.
The
he was
Holy
adding
Sacrament.
drugs, and he was making these women trip out. And they were prophesying, but it's all fake. But I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what they thought of this. I wonder if this was like some other Eleusinian Christian type of thing going on. But yeah, that could be that would be really bad if someone was drugging Eucharist and giving people without their knowing. So like, it's just, but you can see it's right there in the heart of it, right in the middle of the Eucharist.
Yeah, it's right there in the heart. For me, the limits to this fascination with psychedelics, which I'll obviously share, is once you understand something that Carl Jung said, and Carl Jung, I don't remember which passage, but Carl Jung said explicitly, he said, there is no better tool for convincing people about the truth of the scientific materialist worldview. So not the spiritual world, the scientific, then psychedelics. Because if psychedelics can give you an experience that is invariably described as divine, mystical, metaphysical, godlike, and psychedelics are a chemical compound, then
it's all chemicals.
It's all chemicals.
And
that's the trap.
Scary and fascinating at the same time.
It's scary. It's fascinating only if you start to think of matter differently. If you think of matter the way the modern scientists insist, that it's all out there floating in a meaningless vacuum, then it becomes scary. If you want to, you talked about like the Gospel of Mary, right?
Yeah.
And I understand we only have a fragment, but the fragment that we have,
there is a lot in there.
Opens up literally, like imagine, like for a modern Christian who doesn't know a lot about these alternatives, you have the scene where Mary Magdalene is sitting with Jesus, the Master, and asks Jesus, "What is matter? Matter, like the material world." What strange question to ask Jesus.
Yeah.
Right, but not if you consider that Gnostic point of view of matter as being the trap.
And in that same text, she also asked, "What is sin?" And strangely, he says, "There is no sin.
Yes.
You just call it that."
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
What is going? That like completely changes everything, you know. But like, there's something. This is a very spiritual text, obviously.
Yeah. So to me, everything we talk about, they're elements. They're very powerful elements to know these things, but they're elements waiting for center, if you will, to be united, which is what I call the new revelation. There's.
Do you see it coming anytime soon? What are your thoughts on the?
It's unpredictable. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. If you were predicted, it wouldn't be a revelation.
You think we are right now in a state of limbo,
Yeah.
where you have the old ways and the current ways,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
we're actually just waiting for something new.
Yeah. And it's the idea of form versus content. It's the idea of something. It's not necessarily a new thing, right? It's a new form that brings, the things that are going to compose it are there. I'm convinced that this, whatever new, call it religion for lack of a better term, is going to come, it's going to include psychedelics. It's going to include this sort of pantheism that you see so prevalent in the New Age movements.
Yeah.
It's going to include elements of Christianity. It's going to include, but all these are going to be building blocks, and the form is going to be radically new. And it's that form, like Christianity is a form. The god of wine, who might have been Dionysus, the Eucharist, the dying and
So
resurrecting.
you are still reaching back to the past,
Yeah,
but
all
also
these things
moving forward.
is matter. What makes Christianity is the form these things take.
Yeah. Because a lot of successful religions are linked to their past.
Yeah.
They go back to the ancient prophets.
Yeah,
They go
yeah.
back to some, patriarchal father.
Yeah.
That's what they usually all have in common.
Yeah.
And then you look at like these newer religions like Scientology that tries to
Which
just
is very Gnostic in a way.
It is very Gnostic, yeah. But it's trying to really be futuristic and Dianetics
Yeah,
and
yeah.
aliens and this and that. And I don't know if I call it a successful religion. It's got a lot of money, but I just don't know if that's going to be.
It hit a chord. It hit a chord with a lot of people.
Sure.
And that's enough to take notice.
Yeah.
It's like every fashion, every trend, everything. If it hits a chord, it means something. It means there's something there.
I don't know. I just feel like people are, no matter what year it is, if it's 5,000 AD or 10,000 AD, people are always going to be obsessed with the past because it's the only thing that we can look back at with certainty. Not certainty. It's the only thing we can look at. The future is just uncertainty. The past is not certainty, but it's like there's something we can look at. And there's always going to be a fascination with it. And I think that's where you draw from.
Hello, everyone. I would like to take a moment to let you know about a demo app we have created to showcase the concept of our ancient Greece revisited AI project. We would like you to try it out and send us feedback, which we'll evaluate to decide if it's a project worth pursuing or not. The app is a demo of features and logic, but it doesn't have any trained models or AI frameworks built into it. It uses generic LLMs, so don't expect to get some valuable content out of it. We would like to hear your feedback on the general approach of the project and not the actual results, at this stage at least. So, try it out, and thank you very much.
So that brings us, I guess, moving to the closure of this great discussion. Like, what does the future hold for the Gnostic Informant?
Well, I am, I've been discussing my sort of transformation from when I was a Christian to thinking about early Christian groups and Gnosticism and calling myself a Gnostic, and then moving away from that, and then sort of becoming just agnostic, maybe even atheist for a while. And then in the last year to 2 years, or maybe a little longer than that, the year to 2 years roughly, believing that there's something that brings us inspiration, which the ancients called the muse. And my going forward is, what do I do about that? Do I start calling myself a pagan? Do I join a cult? What do I do? And that's going to be the future for myself, is to figure out what that even means to believe in inspiration. And that's, I'm going to have to navigate that however I do.
I think it's a wonderful place to be, and I know it can be a painful place to be, but if I have half an advice to give, it's like you should stick with the pain. No one said. I remember reading a book by called The Irrational Man, which is a very, very fascinating book about existentialism. If you want a truly existentialist primer, that's the book for you. And he's talking about a lot of fascinating things. And he says he's talking about the muse and how I don't remember who he was referring to, but one of the greats who was talking about the muse. And then, almost as a side note, the author says, surely all this sounds as nothing but a metaphor. But that is only a metaphor for those who have really never experienced such divine madness themselves. So it's like, it all sounds very poetic, very gentle, or the muse, but it's like, I think Tolstoy said, love is a harsh and terrible thing in reality, in contrast to love in dreams. The inspiration of the muse it can be very harsh in comparison.
That's fascinating. Let me ask you one more question too.
Yeah.
Is what do you think about because I think maybe you don't agree with this. I think that the younger generation is on its way out of traditional Christian religion, and I do think there's been more and more interest in some other thing,
The
alternatives. What do you see going forward in the next, let's say, century or so?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that? Maybe just here in Greece or something.
Yeah, here in Greece, and I've been talking about this with my wife yesterday. To get a glimpse, you have to look at the underdog, right? So it's a bit of a segue, but I'm trying to get to that point.
Sure.
It's like, I'm very fascinated about the people who can see marginal trends and recognize them. So imagine hip hop, right? It's a huge, like, multi-trillion-dollar industry. Like, you go back to the time it started, probably in the early 70s.
Yeah, late 70s, yeah.
You take like a well-to-do musical producer and you drag him to some kind of corner of New York.
Or they're beatboxing and doing break dancing. That's the late 70s, right?
You take them there to a black neighborhood. He's afraid to walk there, and you point to some guy. He's got a scar on his face. He's been 3 years in prison. He's a pimp. He's a criminal. He deals with drugs. His voice is like muffled from 1,000 joints, and he's like speaking rhythmically. He's doing something weird there. And you try telling him that's the future. That's the music your kids
They wouldn't see it.
They wouldn't see it. They wouldn't see it. Some did.
Some did.
Some did. And became, billionaires. Some did. So I'm always like, I've trained my eyes to look at the fringes differently. The way things look now, like, you see a lot of the new pagans, and I understand they might look funny to most people.
Couldn't agree more.
How do you think, like, the early hip hoppers look?
Right.
Ridiculous. Like who cares about these people? And yet,
like, I see these groups online, and they can look a little bizarre.
Very.
You can see that there's a community that is
there's something there. So you're asking me, I'm trying to find that angle there. I'm looking at this community that I'm in more and more frequent contact with. I'm not there myself. I don't have their practices, for sure, and most of their beliefs. I have more disagreements philosophically than I have agreements. But I look at them and I see there's an authenticity there. And I'm trying to see the hip hop success story out of these.
Interesting.
Half crazy, some like in the middle of a midlife crisis, some have a grudge against Christianity because they feel it repressed their sexuality. Some, all these group that from an outsider might look ridiculous.
But, and just to end this off, because eventually hip hop became commercial and then became friendly to the household. Is that what's going to happen with all these chaotic pagan online groups? Maybe that's what needs to happen.
You need to find the angle,
the commercializing
of where that is going to fit, because hip hop,
which the original old heads of this movement are not going to like it. It's going to make it grow.
Exactly.
They won't like it, but it's going to work for them.
Exactly, because hip hop filled some kind of gap, some kind of need,
and
which is hard to express.
And just to finish this off, to go back to our original, this is all perfectly tying together. That's what happened with Christianity.
Exactly.
It became corporatized.
Exactly.
The Romans stepped in,
Exactly.
Constantine and Theodosius, and they commercialized it and they made it into a corporation.
Exactly.
And all the Gnostic groups fell aside.
Absolutely.
Is that what's going to happen?
Again, the hip hop, the like the gangster sitting at the corner of a New York street in the 70s, the early Christian, former slave, half Greek, half Scythian, who knows, living in rags. Try telling a Roman noble that he's the future.
Right.
And yet he was the future. Someone like Paul, that's what is needed. Someone like
Paul will step up and take this thing and move it to the next generation.
Someone like Paul, who in a like American comedy film would be some like a marketing CEO type person, and he's going to look at all these movements and say, I know what needs to be done here. Like a Ray Kroc. What Ray Kroc saw in McDonald's. You want the Ray Kroc for paganism.
I think, well said. I think you're right.
So my man, it's been great. Like I always say with people, I enjoy conversations very much. It's only the beginning of a fruitful spiritual relationship. And thank you very much for doing this. Thank you very much for being here. I understand you were here for your own purposes as well, but it's great taking the time and place. And we'll keep on this path, I think. Yeah. It feels like both of us.
And I always tell my audience at the end, you have just attained true gnosis.
Perhaps so. Perhaps so. So, what I always say on my audience is thank you very much. And much more mundane. Please like and subscribe and share this video and consider supporting us on Patreon.
And if you're watching this on my end, make sure you hit the links in the description for Ancient Greece Revisited.
Thank you very much, man. So thanks everyone for watching.